unraveling the unconventional is something that all of us are looking at, and I'm sort of going from the unconventional to a very, very conventional foundation. My book, Lost Wisdom of Swastika. By the way, I'm truly impressed. I walked out to use the restroom, and a student walked out to get a sign on my book, which was like, great, man, this is fantastic. I thought the youth were really interested only in Chetan Bhagat books, but great. If you're reading philosophy, that's fantastic as well. So, I'm going to talk about things which you might think is very conventional, it's very wisdom, it's very historic, but in my journey across the world, and I've done all the way from investment banking to now a rural startup, what I realized is there are foundational, fundamental truths that you cannot deny, right? That's something that you need to absolutely, absolutely focus on. Something that I've learned in 20 years of my journey, I think you should start off with that, right? So I start with, what are the fundamental teachings that Bhagavad Gita gives you, and what are the fundamental 3 questions that it asks you to ask yourself? And people go, well, let's not go there. I say, well, let's come to it. So the fundamental 3 questions that Bhagavad Gita asks you to ask yourself are, who am I? Where do I come from? And where am I going? And so everyone just goes, well, how's this useful? Well, I have to get from here to the airport. What do? I pull out Google Maps. And Google Maps has these list of things that it wants me to fill out. So it has the from address, the to address, and it wants you to select from the icon of things, right? Are you on a cycle or a bus or a tram or walking or whatnot? What are those 3 questions? They're exactly the same thing. Where address, to address, and exactly who you are. So no matter how much we change, is it Bhagavad Gita or Baba Google, the questions remain the same. And that is where we are in a problem, in a situation and a fix, as youth, as a country, because we are trying to achieve a target of $1 billion, billion dollar, trillion dollar companies, but we don't really know where we're coming from, right? And I think that is what is most important. Because if I start with the topmost startups in India, it could be Paytm, it could be Flipkart, it could be whoever that you're thinking of, those companies might have achieved $1 billion valuations. Again, mind my words, valuations, they're not actually $1 billion companies. They might have achieved those valuations, but what they've done or who they've got funded by is actually the most important thing. None of those companies have been funded by companies or financiers from within India. They're all funded by US, UK, China, or Japan, right? And that's what makes a huge difference. So as youth today, if you think of setting a company, you can only set up companies which are in favor of the investors, not what is favorable for the people over here. If Flipkart was sold for $1 billion to Walmart, what did the country of India get? Nothing. Literally nothing, right? I mean, you thought that you got discounts at Flipkart and the products that you're buying, and some of the artisans probably benefited, some of the people probably benefited. Well, that's fantastic. But today, Walmart is here to kind of take control, and what prices they decide to sell you those products at is really their will, right? That's not something that we control. So it's extremely important for us to know where we are coming from. And the reason I keep talking about my journey is because what I've been able to sort of learn is that we come from a phenomenally rich culture. It is not something that can be force-fit into a bipolar narrative which we are being tried to sort of sell. And that's where I ended up writing a book, a philosophy book on swastika. Why would someone like me write a book on swastika? What is the swastika? Why? You've seen symbols everywhere, you draw it on homes, in pujas, on cars, new building inaugurations, but nobody really tells you what exactly is that thing, right? That symbol has a very deep meaning. Right? What amazes me even more is when I tell people that a movie like Inception or Interstellar is actually based on our philosophy. So people just go, with a quizzical look, what exactly are you talking about? Well, Interstellar talks about the 4th dimension. That's exactly what the swastika is all about. It's essentially a 4-dimensional cube. And that 4-dimensional cube is about the 4 dimensions that exist in every possible sphere of life, right? So be it in business, be it in life, that's essentially the 4-stage philosophy that Indian philosophy is all about. So it's dharma, artha, kam, moksha, it's buddhi, siddhi, vriddhi, shuddhi. I mean, it's all the 4 stages that you're talking about. That's why there are 4 Vedas, that's why there are 4 yugas. So how is it relevant for me today, right? There are essentially 4 stages of your awakened life. You're awake, you're asleep, you're dreaming, or you're none of the above or all of the above. And that 4th state is called Turiya Avastha. That Turiya comes from the word Chaturya, which is where my name comes from, Chaturvedi. So it's the 4th state. This is not something mythical, it's all very well documented. And those things are important because once you start understanding that, then you start understanding the whole market. And I'll come to a couple of examples why it's relevant for us today. So when you start to understand these things, suddenly you'll realize there are things that are happening and you're trying to understand, but you can't see them. So for example, everyone who's trying to tap the 90% market that everyone talks about in India, let me assure you, you're actually not aware of that market. You don't even know where that market is. You don't know what exists in that market, because that market exists on the fourth state. How it exists is something that you're not aware of because you don't know the language, right? And when you're trying to understand this idea, the concept of fourth state, well, this is something as simple as saying the British colonized India for 250 years. And they, after that, you had 70 years of education. It's incidental that there's a TEDx event. I'm speaking in English. You guys are able to understand English as well. But after all those years, the total percentage of Indians communicating in English is less than 5%. Right? That should startle everyone. The total investment of life insurance industry made in India, which exists for 70 years in India, before that they existed when their assets were acquired by LIC. And those guys have invested in excess of $10 billion in marketing life insurance products. $10 billion in 70 years. Every fourth ad used to be a life insurance industry ad. But you're suddenly realizing that the total penetration of life insurance industry in India is less than 3%. $10 billion in marketing, every fourth ad was a life insurance ad, but it does not sell in India. Why? Because a किसान की कीमत उसकी जान से ज़्यादा होती है, एक किसान की ज़मीन की कीमत उसकी जान से ज़्यादा होती है, and you're not able to understand that. So you're thinking, if I go to his wife, I just, I'm asking for a 100 rupee investment, and why can't she make a 100 rupee investment? Because that's what's going to protect them. Well, guess what? They can invest 150 rupees in a puja in a local temple, because they trust that more, because it actually gives them results. Right? It might, you might laugh, but it works. In rural areas, it's working. How is it working for them? Are they working in a different dimension? Possibly. I don't know, you don't know. It's time to find out. So instead of interpreting something that you're trying to do from outside in, if you start to understand exactly what the people are doing from inside out, we'll actually start to sell to them what they really need, rather than what we're trying to sell them. And that's where my whole idea of a $1 trillion economy exists over here. Today we are selling products which actually has stopped making sense, or gradually making lesser and lesser sense. Because pick up the numbers. If I ask you in the past 20, 30, 40 years, give me a single product, not 10, just one product from the FMCG sector which has increased in size, increased in quality, and reduced in price. You can't name a single product. Be it Maggi, be it pan masala, be it toothpaste, be it dental powder, whatever. Everything is actually reduced in size, reduced in quality, and increased in price. So exactly who's making money here, right? The product penetration is not really going deeper. It's just the spread is going out wider, so the companies are able to project more numbers, and then you have a competition like a Patanjali which comes up and sort of sweeps the market, but then they're also in doldrums today, right? The thing is, you got to make this a producer's economy, not just a consumer's market, right? Which is why I sort of echo sentiments with what Mr. Vikasha said before this. But not completely on board with it, because I think there's a huge opportunity for making India a producer's economy, which is where the future of a lot of you people lies. Because we can't think about, again, come back to the same basic three questions. Who am I, where have I come from, where am I going? Everywhere I go, a lot of people, kids want to set up Facebook. I said, okay, fantastic. Facebook was set up in 2002 by Zuckerberg. So the guy wants to set up Facebook for Bihar. I said, well, that's really not innovation. What he did was in 2002, in Bihar, at Harvard, in Boston. The weather was different, the place was different, the context was different, internet was different, everything was different. Today, if you want to do something, you have to do something which is more relevant for India, for the context, for the place that you're in, for the people you're with, right? And I think those innovations will make a lot of difference. So in 2010, when I quit my job, and I was very excited about this whole idea of rural economy, everyone is, I started looking at the same exact way that most of the people do. And what I realized is that while I can go and set up something, so I started out with doing cash crop farming. And I'm not going to go into the details, but cash crop farming is essentially about chamomile, aloe vera, things like that, which essentially the essential ingredients that go into make deodorants and scents and perfumes and cleaners and whatnot. And it yields you about 4,000 rupees per month per acre. And I made that. And I thought this is a fantastic business model. So what if I could scale this? But if you go to a State Bank of India, you can't get a 1 lakh rupee loan on that kind of business model. Why? Because they don't really get it. I mean, this is the stark reality of India. So Mark Zuckerberg could come down here and apply for a 1 lakh rupee loan, he'd probably get it. But if you were to present his business model of Facebook and ask for a 1 lakh rupee funding capital, he's not going to get it, right? That's unfortunately where we are stuck, because we don't really understand the roots that a bank like SBI or the financiers that are working on. Anyway, I moved on from there and I set up a rural BPO. What I realized is that this is the first all-women rural BPO, by the way, it's a world record. But I didn't start out with that, right? I went out to rural areas and we started to train people. We said, okay, great, this is what a rural BPO looks like. What do you guys think? And so, to my utter surprise, this was a Haryana village with a village with Khap panchayats. Half of them were men, half of them were women. All of the women had ghungars and their heads covered. And so after I presented, and my team was there as well, one woman walked up to me and she said, "Sir, mujhe aapke saath kaam karna hai." I said, "This is fantastic. I wasn't really expecting this. I was expecting, some youth to come up and, college kids, college graduates to come up." And she, looked fairly old, like about late 30s. So she said, "No, I really understood what you were talking about and I really want to work with you." I said, "Fantastic. So have you studied in college?" She says, "No, main to 8वीं pass hu." I said, "That probably will not work because we're looking for college graduates." And she says, "No, but I really get the idea of what you're trying to do. Labor arbitrage, you buy cheap, sell for more, and this is where you make money, this is where we make money." I said, "Okay, great, so we'll give it a shot. Have you, worked on computers before?" And she says, "No, I've never seen computer before in my life." I said, "This is going to be really tough, but you understand what I'm going to do?" And she says, "Yeah." So we were going to go out to the next village, but we had to give a primary test to the people who will work with us. And that's where she stopped me. She said, "Sir, before you leave, I have to ask you a question." I said, "Yeah, sure, shoot." And she says, "I've studied in school till 8th grade, and what I was taught in school was ABCD. But the thing that you have in front of you, on that device that is in front of it, it says QWERTY. Why is that?" I'm a computer science engineer, right? I was completely stumped. I said, "Yeah, ye kya puch liya?" Right? I have no idea. So I said, "Okay, Anita ji, you have me on this, but why don't you work on this computer for the next 3-4 hours? We'll go to the next village and come back." And so she did probably work on it. We went to the next village, came back, and this woman is beaming. I said, "What happened?" She's just got up and she says, "I have to tell you something." I said, "What?" And she starts reciting the keyboard, QWERTYUIOP. I still can't do it. I'm pretty sure none of you can do it, or maybe some of you can do it. But here's a woman who's seen a computer for the first time in her life after studying till 8th grade, and she's able to recite a keyboard after seeing it only for 3 hours, for the first time in her life. That for me was my eureka moment. I thought, okay, this is where I'm looking at things in a very, very conventional way. I'm trying to teach computers the way I was taught computers 20 years ago, right? I'm trying to teach computers to you by saying, Charles Babbage's father of computers, there was 286, 386, ENIAC, EDIAC, Apple, Microsoft, none of that mattered to her. If you're driving Maruti, if you're driving a Mercedes, if you're driving a Lamborghini, if you're driving, Ferrari, and all of you get a flat tire, what do? You go out to the same puncture wala who repairs it for the same exact price. He does not need to know engineering or aerodynamics or rubber technology. All he's doing is pulling out the wheel, fixing the flat and putting it back. The reason for that, now I'm giving you this example, but it has to make sense to you that you need to start looking at things from grassroots up rather than top down. If I had forced that model down on them, none of these women would have worked, right? So we went out and trained about 500 women, 50 of them finally came on board, and then they started to work with us. My second challenge came up when I realized we don't have power. In Haryana you get electricity for like 3 hours in the day, and this is 10 years ago, this is not today. Today the situations have changed slightly. And you just don't get electricity, so what do? Right? We went to the district magistrate, we went to the MLAs, and this is not a topic for this particular talk, but there's a huge story behind it. Why there's no power? You're generating enough, but you're not consuming, or you're consuming, but you're not paying for it. That's a whole different nexus, which is not focused for the talk. But I gave up. I said, we can't get electricity, so what do? And here's another eureka moment. When you actually travel to across the world, and definitely across India, what you see is you might not get a glass of clean water, but you will definitely get a chilled beer. In the remotest corners, hega zarur hoga, chilled beer hogi. Now if it's June and they've got chilled beer in a village which doesn't have electricity, so you're wondering, where is this guy getting electricity from? So this guy has electricity, the generator, the power to cool it, but he's not serving beer all day long. So what we did is we made a deal with this guy, the Thekawala, to supply us electricity for 50 computers, which actually does not cost us more than 2,000 rupees a month, and he did that. So the electricity for the first all-women rural BPO, which is a world record, came from a Theka. The women had not actually studied computers, right? The story that got published in the media, the first one, is about women empowerment, right? That's where our society is lacking the narrative. Because everyone thinks that I'm empowering women. Well, guess what? Not only me, I don't think women themselves can empower women. None of us can, right? Until there is a will, until you understand what's really needed. And so the people themselves started to drive themselves, right? And that is where the whole idea of innovation comes in. So, once this became a huge hit, it started to expand. We've gone to about, 8 states. We got about 600 women on board. But then I realized what I really need to talk about is the philosophy. That the people really don't need to look at existing successful business models. They need to start looking at it afresh every time, all the time. You can take the principles, you can take the philosophy, you can take the ideas, but you can't actually implement it the exact same way that they did, right? Which is where my idea of unraveling the unconventional comes from. That you've got to be unconventionally approached, that you've got to start looking at things afresh every moment. You can't, rest on your past laurels. You can't rest on, this is what this guy was saying. Okay, the fundamentals can be the same, but you need to start innovating based on the needs today. Based on the resources you have today, based on the wisdom that you have today, based on the things that exist for you today, right? Which is where the idea comes that all of us have had haldi doodh, for all of our lives, but who productized it? It's Starbucks, with turmeric crafting. So they sell it for $10 back to you, and you drink it, and you come back and you tell us the fundamentals. How do you understand how turmeric was discovered? I mean, it is very well documented in Patanjali Yoga Sutras, but how do you understand it is from the 4th dimension. Unless you understand Swastika, unless you understand Sanskrit, unless you understand, and I'm not saying become a pandit, become a doctor, do a PhD, but you need to understand the fundamentals that this is not some mythical culture, this is not some mythical philosophy, it's something which is solid, scientific. So start indulging, start exploring your local areas, start exploring your rural areas, start creating the value creation that is really needed, and come up with $1 trillion companies. Thank you very much.